the Chagrin Falls Exempted Village School District Policy Committee meeting. It's June 23rd, 2020 at 1 p.m. Ashley, do we need to take a roll, or we don't typically? And Ashley, your sound's not on, but I think that was a no. Okay.
Sorry, I was already looking at the agenda.
Okay.
That's a no, not for committee meetings. We do not.
Okay, good. I just added a little recap that our last meeting was April 7th at 1 o'clock via Zoom. And I put a link to the February 2020 PDQ document we had, and it was a short meeting. We just updated the policies that were required, and we have since approved all those at our April and May meetings. So today we're going to start with the May 2020 PDQ summary of policies. Okay.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's a crossover between the first bullet on the agenda with the PDQ and recommendations from our legal counsel in bullet number 2 as they correspond to those policies. So as we kind of talk through, I think there's only one thing, maybe more than that, that carries over from we just make sure we capture our legal counsel's wording on things.
Are there any policy, we only have an hour and I've been in 4-hour policy meetings. Are there any policies that we definitely want to get through to be ready for the next meeting?
We should do these GRBA ones because they were required by law like in April, but we just got them. So, I mean, I think we'll be done with that in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. If anyone checked the spreadsheet, and then we had our attorneys review it, and I think we make all of the recommendations from our attorney, except on GBR AA-R. I felt there was one word that was inconsistent. They defined the word individual, but yet they used the word individual in the policy twice that had 2 different meanings. So I wanted to change the second one to caregiver. And other than that, I was totally fine with what our attorney recommended. Anyone else have anything on those?
No, I agree. Just Barb, I would work off of Eric Johnson.
The attorney. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the red line versions.
And I also noticed that in GBRA-R that same individual is listed.
You know what? But they don't define it there, so that's why I don't. So if you want to change that to the word caregiver too, that's fine. But it was only that one that they decided to define the terms. And,
yeah, I noticed that. Okay, so I'm going to change that to caregiver also.
Okay. All right. Anything else on those policies that we're required to have because of the coronavirus situation?
No, the only other ones I would say you can jump down to they're relevant to they're COVID related as well as and relevant to our rental agreements. So we've paragraphs to those as well.
Okay. Let me get back to the agenda. I think we're good on the PDQ summary of policies. So next, should we go to OTES 2.0?
Sure.
All right. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, I can go ahead and.
Okay.
I go and take that. To give you a little background, and I will not belabor it, but OTES 2.0 was going to be rolling out this coming school year 2021. And some districts, including ours, based on when our collective bargaining agreement was signed, had the ability to delay that until the following year, 21-22, which we had made a decision with our administrative team to do that just because from an implementation perspective, I can go into it, but I don't think I need to. But then COVID allowed all districts to be able to move that out. This policy gives us the opportunity to start OTES 2.0 in the 21-22 school year. It allows us to retain OTES 1.0 for this coming school year 2021. And that's what we would plan to do is implement OTES 2.0 in 21-22. and remain this coming year in OTES 1.0. It gives the opportunity for our administrators to take that certification, which they'll be required to do. And then the other big piece about that is it allows our district to understand what high quality student data is as regarding OTES 2.0. There's this clause in OTES 2.1 for student growth measure. And in OTES 2.0, it removes student growth measure and inserts high quality student data, which is it's really a better metric because it really allows us to really understand how it aligns to learning standards, understand what it's intended to measure, aligns with courses and grade levels better, where SGM in some ways is a little less relevant or can be a little less relevant from time to time, depending on how that's measured. So I think there's going to be better buy-in, at a teacher level as well as a principal level on some of the measures. I don't think anything else from a policy perspective that I want to highlight in here, but I'll just kind of pause and ask if there's any questions.
Those high quality measures, I know we were supposed to get input from community, the staff. Has that been done, or are we going to do that this year?
I think from a larger perspective, and Becky's not on the line here, but she has been working as well as the principals on assessment for a good part of the time with grade levels and with departments. So I think, and you've even seen some of those come through from board presentations, all of the assessment work that we've been doing. But this specifically will require some work this next coming year, in regards to defining what high quality student data is, and how it relates to each area and each grade level and each building. And so there's some work to be done here too, which that year gives us the ability to kind of more specifically define that. Okay, and we are required to adopt this new policy or some version of it that we can edit a bit. But since it doesn't take effect for a following year, do we keep the old one in policy, or do we just have to refer to it? Or I believe it addresses that in the notes that I read over. I think you're right. Where it says keep the existing policy in place for 1 year. As far as what we do as a policy committee, I'm not really quite sure if we have two different policies out there that say the same thing. But I think, in practice, we want to keep the OTES 1.0 for next year. But I do believe, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we need to adopt the language for OTES 2.0. Okay. Yes, we do. That's why I'm like, okay, we have to adopt it. We're not going to implement for a year. So I didn't know if we just, I guess it's in these notes, but. Yeah, I think we should move it forward just to kind of keep things moving on the same page. And the other thing is, I served on the OPES rewrite team at the state level. There's going to be an OPES, that's Ohio Principal Evaluation System, coming out as well. And I'm not sure if that timeline in terms of rollout will be adjusted or not, but that will have to be adopted as well. Right. And a lot of the optional things in here, we already had those in our current one. So we would just continue those. And as you recommend, Chris, where you don't have to adopt an accomplished person every year. And the same way you still got to evaluate them, but not the full-blown evaluation. I do know the title is now evaluation of professional staff, whereas ours says certified staff. I don't know if you want to keep ours as certified, or is there a reason that it's professional, or I don't know. Well, the only reason I asked, I had a question about that, and then I looked. We have another policy that specifically addresses the Ohio School Counselor Evaluation System, which is another part of our certified staff. And so I think this really addresses specifically OTES, this new policy, and the other one is still in place for the counselors. Okay. And that counselor evaluation isn't being recommended for any changes. That's staying the same. It actually aligns a little bit better with OTES 2.0 than it does OTES 1.0. Okay, then I think my only other question on that is
per our CFEA contract, staff at Accomplished and Skilled, I believe they get to pick their evaluator. And we did include that in our policy before. I don't see it in this, but if it's in the collective bargaining agreement, they're going to get to do it. So I don't know if we need to state that like we did before.
They can request an evaluator that doesn't have to be honored. So annually, they have the opportunity to request an evaluator.
Right. Do we need to say that in policy? If it's in their contract.
If it's in the contract, we have to abide by it.
Yeah, so then I'm fine with this being a little less specific. Okay, anyone else have anything? No? Okay, Barb, you got all that? Okay. Shall we move on to pay to play participation fee? Which I think on this one, we just see that our current policy does say that we can charge a fee.
Yeah, that's specific to athletics. I also put in a board report, I think, not last week, the week prior, so I guess it'd be June 12th, regarding a recommendation. So you would the board would have to approve the fees as we approve fees. And I think we need to kind of make that decision and bring it to the next board agenda so it's on the radar of individuals. And just for those on the call, I had a recommendation of $100 fee with a $500 cap for student athletes in high school, a $75 fee with a $500 family cap for students in the middle school.
And we have no more guidelines on what we think fall sports are going to look like, do we, Billy?
Well, they accelerated phase 2 to the end of June here, which tells me that OHSA is going full steam ahead. To me, it's confusing that the NFL is debating whether they're going to play football, but the Ohio High School Association seems to be blazing ahead.
Yeah.
And you can go to a water park, but you can't have a graduation.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
Cuyahoga County and Lake County might get a different answer.
So Bob, would you outline what input you need from this committee with regard to, besides the fee? What do we need to decide today?
No, you have the ability to, do it in current policy. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Originally, I had thought we might have to change policy, but it's in our current policy to charge for athletics.
So really, from a policy
don't.
committee perspective, we don't have to do anything.
No.
Sometimes in policy, we look at the applications. Like Chris, you remember we went through that whole rigorous process of community access to facilities. And sometimes we do get into what is involved in enacting the policy. Are you, Bob, saying now you want to have that discussion at a board meeting?
If you're talking about the form in which people would fill out, is that what you're talking about?
All of the parameters around what this program would entail, which would be when does it start, what is included, what is the fee? I guess I'm wondering when we're having that discussion.
We can certainly engage in it now if you'd like to, if this committee wants to make a recommendation up to the board or the board. I mean, really, it's about the, I assumed when we did this, we based our savings on implementation this school year. So that was my assumption that it would take place in the fall of this year. So I'm not sure that needs conversation unless I had misunderstood that. And really then it becomes really two decisions: one, amount, and then two, do we expand beyond sports to other activities?
Well, personally, I am not really in favor of it at the current time. I am as a cost saving measure if it needs to get done, but I'm having a hard time with it when I look at the resolution we did at the last board meeting about, trying to be, anti-discriminatory and anti-racism. And I worry that this will affect the people who would struggle to pay. And I know we said we would have things in place where they can, get the fee waived, but I just would want to make sure that that would be a seamless process and not make people uncomfortable. Like, I wouldn't want them to have to go to the athletic department to ask for that. I think maybe that goes through the student counselor's office and they just have to request it and it kind of gets automatically done. Because I wouldn't want a coach to know like, oh, this person didn't pay or did. And so I'm having a real hard time with it. And I don't think the savings are that great that I would want to rush into implementing it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, going off of Mary Kay, I hear you about the sensitivity of how it's implemented for students that can't afford it. But going off of Mary Kay's comments and kind of going further down that direction, I think it's important that so I'm okay starting with athletics. If we decide to do it in the fall, I'm okay starting with athletics just because of the scope. But I do think it should be an activity copay fee beyond more than just athletics to be equitable. And then I do think instead of just a flat fee added per sport, we need to look at the cost contributed by the district relative to what parents have already been paying, because I think some of this effort should be to balance out the athletic contribution on behalf of the district with what parents contribute and make that more equitable through this process.
So let's talk about, I like that word copay. I think the idea of calling this something besides pay to participate is really valuable, because the idea that it is just a partial part of the expense that's being picked up by our family. So I like that idea of it being an athletic copay or an activity copay. If you guys agree, I say, let's change the name of what we're calling this. And then secondly, as far as the costs, I think we had talked about some differential in the fees, but before we get into that, I kind of wanted to look at equity amongst all of the sports. So right now we have some athletics where parents are already paying part of the fee, and we have others where they're not. From what I've been able to garner, it's typically a sport where we have to rent a facility in order to provide that athletic. But it's not necessarily a sport where the district is paying more to offer that sport. So for example, in football, we have the greatest amount in supplementals because we have so many coaches, which is appropriate.
Plus, we also have the most revenue coming in from ticket sales to offset it.
And that's a question I wasn't sure, Ashley, if the numbers that we've seen with regard to athletics take into account any revenue from ticket sales for basketball or football, or if these are, I assumed that these numbers were strictly, what we're paying net of the revenues. The revenues are going toward other things in the athletic department.
Well, the numbers that we provided before we started the pay to play conversation, where you wanted to see how much parents are contributing per sport, that did not take that stuff into consideration. That was, here's what we pay. It didn't include things like coaches. It didn't include the athletic department's time, all that kind of stuff. There are a million other things that get kind of dispersed amongst everybody. But the spreadsheet that you were provided back then per sport did not include that stuff.
Okay.
I don't know.
Honestly, it may not be material, because I think my point is, for one thing, and just kind of backing up a little bit, like, why are we doing this? Right. Well, we are seeking to engage our families in helping to support our ability to provide the range of athletic programming that we have provided traditionally. We don't want to have to cut any sports that are smaller, for example. We don't want to have to cut any of our coaches or our assistant coaches and reduce our coaching staff, because we think that will have an impact on the students' experience with the athletics. So I think it's important when we're framing this conversation to our community for people to understand that the board is really doing everything possible to retain the valuable student experience with athletics. And one of the ways that we can do that is by asking for parents to have this copay, because it's very difficult for us to achieve any revenues or cut expenses in any other way except when we start looking at personnel. And then we look at all of the athletics that we offer. I would propose that there's an equity issue with regard to students accessing any individual sport. It should be the same cost to them, regardless of what that athletic activity is. So Mary Kay, to your point, is it equitable for us to say, if you want to be on the swim team, you have to be ready to pay, I don't know, Sharon, what is it per year that swimming pays? Something like $500?
250 or 200.
Oh, I know, and hockey is exorbitant, but I
Yeah.
mean, I know when we looked at these before, they're like, well, we can't have this sport unless we have pay, and I totally get it. And so I do not know that we can come up with something equitable by this fall. And I think if we did a pay to participate of $100, we're going to end up more in the hole than we currently are. If we went and charged everybody the same for everything, I think it's going to cost us money, not save us
Well,
money.
let's talk that through a little bit. So we had also, Ashley, you ran a scenario for us of $150 per athletics. That generates an additional $40,000, which covers the facility rental fees. And that would allow us to make this equitable across the board regarding whatever sport you want to participate in. You would be paying a $150 fee, and that would be the same for every family.
All right. Okay, I'm going to just say, does that include cheerleading?
I believe so.
Because I mean, that's just the one I remember from having a cheerleader. Oh my God, cheerleading costs so much money that you wouldn't believe. I mean, and I hope it's different now, but the cheerleaders had to make scrapbooks for the people, and they had to do, I mean, I think they got rid of goodie bags, hopefully, and stuff, but there was, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we don't know. And I'm sure this goes on in lots of other sports, that there's required things that, so I don't think I think this is a long-term study. This is not something that we should jump into right now if we're really trying to be equitable.
I think we need to engage Charlie, because the board should understand the history. I mean, prior boards accepted and brought those sports on through a process in which those were clubs first. Those rental fees were totally picked up, or all fees were totally picked up by parents. And then prior boards agreed to take on supplementals, transportation, insurance, those types of things, under the understanding that we could not support the facilities. Now,
Right.
that it's a forever decision, but I think it's really important to take into consideration how this happened and why and where it's at going forward.
I could see families in hockey and swimming, and I think gymnastics as well, as paying extra expenditures. And maybe, as you're saying, Mary Kay, cheerleading is as well. I'm saying, so now we're going to pay $250 plus $150. That's essentially what this policy is asking if we don't address this now. And I think we have an opportunity that's different from in the past, where we are asking for this copay. If we increase the amount, which is still, I think, a very reasonable amount that is seen in other districts that are comparable to ours, it allows us to address this without having to wait or do a lot of research or dig up all of the different expenditures.
Well, and I think so. They all the teams spend out of pocket stuff, like what Mary Spirit spirit festivity stuff like what Mary Kay is suggesting. I'm not saying that the cheerleaders don't spend more, but
Right.
I don't
Oh,
think,
no,
I don't think-
it was just an example. Yeah.
but no, I agree with you. But I also hear what Bob is saying. I think sometimes things evolve and we make the right decisions one off as things are evolving. And then there's a point in time where it's worth taking a step back and looking at how did we get here? And now holistically, is this the right thing for the district? And I think this might be one of those examples. If Ashley can confirm that the 150 gives us the ability for the first semester, for the fall semester at the high school level, to do this in a way that's more equitable while we have Bob bring Charlie into a meeting and walk us through the history and how the decisions have been made and talk us through options as to how to make the whole process more equitable moving forward, that would be a good starting place for me.
I can't confirm that right now. I would need to look at all the expenditures. The information that I don't have on estimating revenue is I have a number of athletes per sport. That's it. So when we're talking caps, I don't know how much revenue that's going to pull off, because do we have several families? Do we have one family that has 7 kids and I'm counting every one of those as $150 a pop when they're not going to pay that? They're going to max out at 500 or whatever the cap is. So I need to I think get a little bit more information and look a little deeper with Charlie and see where we're spending money. Because here's the other thing. There are things like those spirit items that are not accounted for in our books at all. A team gets together and says, we want to buy sweatshirts, we want to buy t-shirts, and they just go do that. Well, it's still $50 out of that parent's pocket, and it's may not be a have to, but they feel like it's a have to because the rest of the team is doing it. Those things aren't involved here either. I don't have any information on that, and I'm not going to be able to get information on that.
Well,
So what I can get is
anyone who has high school kids right now. I mean, part of this is there's a parent organizer who organizes that and takes in those dollars to purchase those things. So, whatever fee we have, I think we need to know there's more of a cost on parents, that they'll experience in this.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. I think we don't need to go to that level of complexity. I think what we're looking at is what the district is paying for an athlete to participate in a sport, and removing what we already have a copay required for at least three that I know of. And I'm just saying, let's eliminate that, make it across the board, the $150 fee, which from just looking at, quickly at the spreadsheet would cover the additional cost of facility rental. And then if you want to get more in depth about, what people are paying out of pocket for kind of optional things with regard to athletics, we could, but I don't really feel like that's necessary. And we're really talking about, like I said, we already basically have a copay in place for some, but not all. So if we're going to put something in place, let's make it the same for all of our athletics.
Well, a couple things. One, I don't know that we know what the rates are for ice time and for pool right now. And what you're essentially doing is you're spreading all that cost over everyone, just so everybody's clear. So if I want to run cross country, I'm helping pay for swimming time and ice time.
Sure. And the same with football. We pay the most for football supplementals, and that cost is being spread across all of our taxpayers.
Right. Well, the last time I remember looking at this, which was a while ago, we looked at everything. And this is back in when we looked, and we also looked at revenue. Football more than paid for itself. Football was a revenue generator for the district. And I believe at that time, so was, is it called men's basketball or boys basketball? That was those two more than paid for themselves and nothing else did. So then you could also say those two sports were helping to cover, athletic expenses. So it's all, there are so many things to look at. And then I also don't know what sports are uniforms provided and what sports people buy their own uniforms. Like, I'll go back to cheerleading. cheerleaders buy their uniforms and their shoes, whatever. As I'm sure swimmers buy their bathing suits, but other sports don't. So, I think it's a slippery slope. So I think if we're going to look at it, we need to spend some time and have the athletic department
All right. But
do an update.
this is only a year thing we're planning right now, or is this going to be permanent moving forward?
I think it would be permanent.
I think we have to look at these. These are cost savings that we're trying to generate on an ongoing basis. So I think we have to consider it on a moving forward.
I understand it if we do go this route, and I'm not advocating for either way, but in the numbers where we first started talking about this, we were looking at this as a cost savings. This would take this from a cost savings to just a cost redistribution. We will no longer be making money on this, just so that everybody's aware.
You mean by removing these athletics that we're requiring a copay right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you, like you said, it would cover those expenditures if we made it. And I'm not looking at the numbers right now, but that's going to make it more of a break even. And it's going to change things from, right now we have this built into our savings numbers as a revenue.
Right.
And it will increase revenue, but it will also, it will just kind of redistribute it. It's not going to.
I recognize that. It's definitely not as much of a cost savings if we make this more equal. But let's definitely run the numbers, because I know that what we had prepared by Charlie Barch last fall, or I can't remember when we got this, was not vetted by you probably fully, Ashley, but what I'm looking at right now was $10,000 expenses borne by families for ice time, and $16,000 was the pool rental with, I think that might be the amount that's borne by the swimming families. So that's $30,000. And if we increase the fee from 100 to 150, the potential revenue is an additional 40,000. So we're actually not going to be making any less money because we're increasing our copay. Which actually, regardless of what we do, I think we should start with 150 anyway, because I think it's much harder to go back a year or so later and say we're increasing the fee. I think this is a very reasonable amount that other districts have done. I don't think it's going to have a deleterious effect on people participating in sports to go from 100 to 150. And it allows us to then at least get a few years out of this before we might have to change the fee structure.
Well, and in terms of implementation, we're doing one flat fee across all the sports. So if we look at it like 3 of our sports already have a copay, it's certainly not equitable to add on this flat fee on top of all of those. I think we have to bring everyone back to the same parent copay baseline and then roll out a dollar figure that is equitable. So I would support the 150 for the fall. And I still think we need to look at this a little more comprehensively.
I was under the impression that the 150 was for the sports, or the 100 we were talking about was for the sports that didn't have a copay already.
That is not how it was implemented in prior years, just so we're all on the same page. All sports equally paid, which I understand. Now you're asking, a swimming parent to pay for, rental and pool time, and then add on to that number. So that becomes a big number. And there are people out there, we should be cognizant that the difference between 100 and 150 will make a difference. I've had people reach out and ask because they're trying to budget accordingly for the fall already.
Mm-hmm. As have I.
I don't mean to be insensitive about that. I think, we have scholarships and procedures in place to help support families that, this becomes an undue burden on them.
Well, this is not a policy committee's decision. It's a whole board decision. So I don't know where we want to go today with this.
Maybe we should just agree on what the policy committee recommendation to the board will be, and then we can have this discussion at the full board or we can summarize this conversation today and bring that to the board to make some decisions on. I'm comfortable either
Yeah,
way.
I don't know that any of this is going to be built into the policy anyway. I mean,
Right.
the policy just states that we can do it.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
Bob was talking about bringing to the next board meeting the parameters for implementation anyway. So that's really where we can continue this side of the conversation then.
Yeah, and I guess I will generate a recommendation, which, because I think we do need to, and if it changes at the board meeting, it changes at the board meeting. I think we do need to finalize what costs are for this fall at least. And then we can certainly define, whatever work the board wants, to be done. And I think looking at revenue, if you're going to look at this, you have to approach it holistically. That's my input. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, I was just going to add, maybe to keep this moving along, we agree to what we're starting off with this fall. And then if there's additional, a deep dive that needs to be done into, I don't want this discussion to prevent this from being enacted this fall. I guess that's my point. So my preference would be, let's go forward. I would like to see it at 150. I think that gives us a little cushioning on some of this analysis that we're then going to undertake. And then once the school year starts, we can do a little bit of a deeper dive into the full range of athletic expenses that are borne by the district and borne by parents, and make sure, we can revisit this equity component. But I do think we need to have a very clear answer for families that are already being asked to contribute about whether this applies to them or not, and whether or not we're athletes in swimming than any other sport. So, I think they have a right to ask, why they're being asked to contribute more than others.
Yeah, I agree. We need closure, at least in the short term, sooner rather than later. And the other piece that we all have to keep in mind, the revenues may not be what we anticipate. Also look completely different. So
Yeah, so that's how I looked at, like, the reason I thought we were charging, at least in my mind, why we were charging a fee for sports is we were having a decrease in revenue, and an increase in rules related to COVID-19 that were going to need to be implemented. That was going to be additional cost. So I thought to me, in my mind, the idea of charging the $100 was to make up for the lost revenue and the increase in rule, or whatever, the increase in policy, or increase, basically the rules change that probably makes us have to implement more processes and stuff to deal with COVID-19. I wasn't aware that other sports were paying a fee, so personally I would have no problem saying your fee's covered because you're already paying a fee. So you pay a minimum of 100, and those sports already had fees. That's how they get implemented. So they're paying the same amount they paid, and that should count towards the 500 family cap limit too.
and I was thinking along the same lines as Greg. I mean, I was not to put the fee in and then get rid of it for the things that already had it. I think was not what I think that needs way more study than what we can say right now. If we want to get something implemented in the fall because of our increased costs and because of we need to save money, I could be fine with the $100, but not if it's going to change hockey and swimming and without doing more of a study. So I don't think we have an agreement, but not that we have to, because we're fine on the policy is fine for whatever. But so I think we should move on from this so that we have 18 minutes left. Let's go to some of the other things. And if we want, we can come back to this, but it's just, we're getting out of the realm of policy committee right now. Okay.
Yeah. So Bob, you're going to bring a recommendation to the next board meeting and we can continue this conversation there. Correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. If I can find my agenda again. Okay. Next we go. Okay, the auditorium and auditorium forums. All we were doing is adding a sentence about that illness and
Mhm.
it's not just about COVID-19, it's like and other illnesses. So I think did anyone have a problem with that? No. Okay. We're good with all those policy KGRs and KGEs. Okay. Next, PE waiver. All right. Bob, did you want to lead this one?
Sure. So as part of cost reduction conversations with the board, there was agreement to move forward with the PE waiver. We've looked at a variety of different ways that a waiver could be implemented, met with Becky and the high school principal on this. And certainly, we've had a lot of conversation with both public and teaching staff on this. So I think the board is pretty well versed in the two sides of this conversation. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time there.
Mhm.
We're at a point where we're utilizing this, leveraging this for potential cost savings. The recommended policy, I think, is relevant to graduation requirements. So the change would have to be made within graduation requirements that we allow for the PE waiver. If you scroll through, I'm trying to just find it on the OSBA policy here.
Page 3 of 5.
Yeah, so that you can see the changes. It's under permissive language. We have not included in the past. We would just include that language. In talking with both Becky and Monica, if this is a cost-saving measure, the recommendation is to go allow kids to get a 0.5 or get the full credits through the waiver. I think I included that on your agenda, as well as some notes regarding potential implementation, being that it be implemented in the 2021 school year for only students that are scheduled to take 7 classes currently, due to what this could do to the high school schedule with mass people dropping and adding going into the new school year. So, just so you know, the add drop policy and guidelines are also included on your agenda if you'd like to review.
And Bob, that's a high school policy that all students are required to take at least 6 classes. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
There are
okay.
students that take 7 and have taken 7.
Okay.
We don't love that when it happens. And so we did, if there are students out there that are 7, that one of those classes is PE and they'd like to leverage this waiver, they can do so.
Sorry, can you just walk me through the credit part again? I was confused. Are you saying we're going to give them a half
Correct.
credit for the PE waiver?
Correct.
And then is there any PE requirement?
There's not.
Okay.
If we adopt the waiver, we can't then ask for any PE requirement.
No, we could change it. We could make them take 1 PE, such as the way Mayfield does it, and give them, then waive 1. You can do that. You just can't exempt, like if we say marching band, it's not a sport. We can't not say marching band's not included. And if we had show choir, we would have to include show choir. I don't believe our choir doesn't qualify as show choir.
Bob, can you elaborate a little bit on, this sounds pretty restrictive, that it's just the students that would be looking at taking a 7th class? This would be
Just for this year.
Oh, for this year. Okay.
Yeah. Because it could cause all kinds of trouble otherwise.
Sure. Okay. So for the 2021 school year, there would be an exception. You'd have to be someone who's already signed up to take 7 classes, and this would provide some flexibility in your schedule.
Correct.
For the 21-22 school year, it's open to anybody who elects to engage in the waiver.
That is
Right.
correct.
Okay.
Because they're supposed to take a class in place of it. So if you are taking 7 classes, you could say, I'm taking a class in place, you know. Yeah, if someone was only taking 6 classes and they drop PE, it would be more difficult to say a class is replacing your gym class.
Yeah, we have to have those conversations about
Yes.
whether we require 6 classes or not going forward. That would certainly provide and loosen up the high school schedule a little bit. So, you know, that started into a broader conversation, and I just don't think, you know, we're ready to make a decision on that. And I do think if we try to adopt this and allow kids to move schedules, the whole high school master schedule is going to be blown up in the fall.
Then for parents who have a child that's not scheduled for PE this year in 2021, I have a feeling the parents are going to have questions based on what year their high school student is and what they've done or not done. We'll just direct them to the high school, the guidance department, to figure out what they're eligible for.
Correct.
Would you anticipate that participation in athletics during the 2021 school year would count towards your credentialing toward the waiver for next year? You understand my question?
I do. And I don't know that we landed on an answer. We had conversations about definitely the spring could count, and potentially, you know, started effectively January of next year. With fall being so unknown at this time, we just didn't make a decision on that. I can circle back and have that conversation. I don't think it impacts what needs to happen from a policy perspective.
No, just I think communicating it out. Well, I'd be supportive of allowing students to accrue their athletic participation credits toward the PE waiver this year, even if they're not enacting the waiver until next year. As I understand, and you guys can correct me because I haven't reread the policy in a while, it's 2 semesters of athletics to count for 1/4 of the credits. You need 4 semesters of athletics to get the full credit. Is that correct? Or is
No,
it just 2?
it's 2.
So 2 seasons, you don't have to take any phys ed but I believe you might be able to tweak that if you want.
And I think the fall, especially even the spring, is going to be problematic if we try to hold kids to schedules, because a parent's going to say, "Listen, I'll just take this next year." That could really create some scheduling problems, honestly.
Sorry, can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So if I'm Ashton Hunt and I'm a junior right
You're
now,
in trouble because you've been in high school for a long time, Ashton.
and I'm a junior right now, and I'm scheduled to take, PE in the fall. I only have 6 classes. I'm going to want to drop that. If you're going to allow me to, if you're going to allow me credit for my soccer season in the fall, I'm going to be pretty angry and want to drop PE this fall, not take the course. I think we're going to create a real problem in our high school.
That's what you're preventing by saying you have to have 7 classes.
Right. Right now, I mean, there's a limited number of kids that are taking 7, and honestly, we always try to counsel away from that. And, those kids that can back off of PE to, lessen their schedule, I think would be a good move. I think if we open the door for this fall and or spring to count next year, we're going to have a scheduling nightmare in our hands.
I appreciate you have a perspective on that and to think through all of the unforeseen consequences of these things. Well, I fully support your recommendation, Bob, of how to implement this. So I think from my perspective, and if we have a lot more to talk about, I think we're ready to bring something to the board.
I agree. I can agree with this, but I've seen policies out there that really define like what it means to complete a season. Like if you are get injured, it doesn't mean you get like, oh, I was on the football team, but I broke my leg. You would still have to go to all the practices and be at the games. So I think that, I don't know that it has to be that doesn't have to be in the policy, but that would somewhere have to be in a handbook or something of
Yeah.
what.
Once we're kind of, I feel like we're heading down this road, I'll have some of that kind of built up.
Okay, because I could just see a nightmare for the high school, like, no, you didn't complete it because you dropped out because of this, or you got suspended from, you get suspended from a sport. I would say that you should not be able to count that then. And you also, I liked somebody's that said you have to have this completed by, I think, the first semester of your senior year. You can't say, oh, I'm taking my sport the second semester senior year and then something happens. So you would not want people, it has to be completed. The sports would need to be completed by the first semester of senior year, so that if your second semester of senior year, you don't have the sports, you get enrolled in a PE class.
Don't they typically do that with the gym classes anyway, Bob?
Yes.
I feel like kind of similar to the athletic copay issue, we're getting a little bit out of policy.
Mhm.
Our job is to say whether or not we're adopting the policy, and then Bob's job is to,
Right.
develop the.
I totally
procedure.
get that. I just am making sure that's on the horizon, because I would not want a senior second semester of senior year and we have another COVID-19 and there's no sports. I do not want someone to not graduate because, oh, I was going to take the sport. That's what that was about.
It's good feedback.
Okay. That was the policies. And then we have other business.
So, sorry, just to clarify then, the policy as written by OSBA will be presented at the next board meeting for
Well,
adoption?
let's just say we take our current policy and add OSBA's
Permissive language.
Permissive language, okay.
because we have other changes in our policy that a slightly different wording than
Right.
OSBA.
Okay, so that's ready for bringing to the board at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Barb's sense?
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other policy business before we could go back if we want? But I know it's 1:55.
Is Chris Wolfter still on?
Yeah, he's sideways.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
With your policies,
My apologies.
for the auditorium, is that time sensitive? Do you want only a one reading on that, or should you go to 2 readings? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess if we do offer, I guess it depends on when we offer people the opportunity to start renting again. We are not right now, but as we do that, we'll obviously want to include that in language in there, the new language, and we would use the new forms. And so I guess that depends. We certainly would. I don't see any reason why we should delay approving that. If we
Okay,
have
right now
rentals
there would
coming
be
through.
2 readings. The first one would be at the July 8th meeting. The second reading would be July 22nd.
Okay. We've certainly had an interest in people wanting to fill out facility rental requests, even for the fall or even into August. And some of those are dependent on how they, the ability for that organization to actually hold the event and how does that fit with health department guidelines. So there's a whole nother challenge with that. But I think we would want to approve the policy as soon as we can, if that makes sense. If anybody's, I guess I would lean to Bob and ask, do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I also think you could put the applications. I'm not hearing anyone, we've got 4 board members on here. I'm not hearing anyone that has major issues. You could send out you could put pending board approval or something in front of it to the people that are interested now and get us through the readings.
Okay.
That's what I'd recommend. I don't, in my 10 years on the board, I don't know that we've ever had to do an emergency policy that we didn't go
Okay.
through 2 readings. I wouldn't want to, do it unless, I mean, if we needed to, fine, or we could follow a special meeting, but I'd recommend 2 readings.
Okay.
Got it.
All right, any other business? All right, and next meeting, I think we wait till the next PDQ comes out, or the next, or if OSBA sends us something else. I mean, I know we're gonna have to update some of our policies to probably include the words transgender and things like that, but they said they will, get to that. It's probably the next PDQ before we'll do that stuff. But it's not like we don't already do those things. All right, anything else?
Not from me.
Everybody? What was that? Not from you? Okay,
You run a good meeting, Mary Kay. We're right on time.
all righty.
Good job.
So who do I see at 3? Sharon?